Hello everyone, I hope you're all doing well. Today I'm going to show you my sourdough bread recipe. So I started making sourdough bread about around the same time as everybody else, but for different reasons. So I'm sure you have been hearing sourdough bread, because everyone started making sourdough bread when the pandemic started and people started running out of instant yeast at the store. So because they couldn't find instant yeast to leave in their breads, they started experimenting with sourdough. I, on the other hand, started making sourdough bread because I knew that that would be the safest way to introduce the various grains to my baby, who was still under 1 at that time. So I was experimenting to get my way around fermenting different grains before I could start giving him bread. So I started off making artisanal sourdough bread, so the ones that you most likely are familiar with when you think of sourdough bread. But now I make a much simpler one. It is a lot easier for me to do, and I make a couple loaves every week for both my baby and for me and my husband. So that's the one I'm going to be showing you today. It's easier, but it uses the KitchenAid mixer. So if you don't have a KitchenAid mixer, then let me know in the comment section below, and then I can look into showing you how to make the artisanal one, which doesn't require a mixer and can be done by hand. It's a little more tedious as it requires more babysitting, but it can be done by hand. So let me know, and I will make a recipe video for that one as well. But this one is quick and easy. You still ferment for quite a few hours. The process is a bit different, as you will see, but it is definitely a lot easier and something that you can do without, something that you can do every week without feeling like it's a chore. So the sourdough bread that I make every week uses spelt flour, Einkorn flour, which is an ancient wheat that I had not even heard about until recently. So spelt flour, Einkorn flour, and oat flour. My spelt flour and my oat flour are sprouted. So technically I could make bread without fermenting it and it would still be somewhat digestible, a lot more digestible than the non-sprouted grains. However, fermenting it makes it even more bioavailable, so I choose to still ferment. So before we go into the recipe, I just want to go over the reason why sourdough breads and fermenting grains is essential. So the reason why fermenting grains is essential or beneficial for, especially when we're introducing grains to babies, is because grains have quite a few anti-nutrients that inhibit the absorption of various minerals and vitamins that we consume. So by fermenting the grain, we are neutralizing these anti-nutrients like phytic acid, and we are making the grain more bioavailable, which means that we are getting more nutrients from those foods. Second, things that contain gluten, like the Einkorn and the Spelt. The oat that I buy doesn't have gluten, but the Einkorn and the Spelt does. So the gluten in the Einkorn and the Spelt is actually being pre-digested by yeast in the fermentation process. So there are people who are gluten intolerant who are still able to digest sourdough bread because the gluten is partly digested. So these are the reasons why it is important to ferment bread and to consume sourdough bread over bread that was baked using instant yeast. And so these are the reasons why I bake it every week. Lastly, slow fermented bread is actually high in resistant starch. So by fermenting it, you're increasing the amount of resistant starch in that bread. And so not only does that keep you fuller for longer, because it doesn't really get digested in the stomach, it goes straight to your colon undigested, and serves as prebiotic to the good bacteria that's in your colon. But on top of that, it also means that it is lower on the glycemic index. And so fermenting or slow fermenting bread is beneficial in all of these various ways, and it is the ideal way to introduce bread to a baby. And once you start making it at home, you'll probably realize, like I did, that you are not gluten intolerant, or you don't have bloating when you eat bread or all bread, but that you're able to tolerate sourdough bread, and that sourdough bread doesn't make you feel bloated, doesn't make you gain weight. And so yeah, let's get to the recipe. So we're going to start by feeding our starter. This is my starter that I normally keep in the fridge. I took it out a couple of hours ago so that it can start to bubble. It's hard to see, let me open it up and show you. So you can see that it's alive. I'm going to be feeding it with flour and water so that we have starter ready for our sourdough bread. So I'm gonna mix it up, and then I'm gonna leave it overnight, and then we'll be able to make our sourdough bread in the morning. So I start by adding the starter that I had in the fridge in my bowl. I'm going to be making 2 loaves tomorrow, so I am doubling up my starter. I'm going to use 1 cup of Einkorn flour, 1 cup of Spelt flour. It's just a little bit darker. These flours are all organic. The Spelt is sprouted and organic. And 1 cup of organic all-purpose flour. So if you see other sourdough recipes, normally they are continuously weighing their flour and their water because the weight is important. This is my easy go-to bread that I make every week, and I do not weigh out my ingredients, but what I do is I keep a ratio of 3 to 2. So 3 cups of flour to 2 cups of water. So if you make half of this recipe and you only use 1.5 cups of flour, then make sure that you only use 1 cup of water. So for my water, I normally warm up a little bit of filtered water. So it shouldn't be hot, but it shouldn't be cold either. So it should be warm water. One. Two. Okay, so now I'm just going to mix my starter, and I'm just going to use a regular fork for that. So this is the consistency that you should be aiming for. If you do weigh out your flour and your water, this should still be the same consistency that you will get. So you would make sure that the weight of the flour and the weight of the water is exactly the same. When you don't weigh it out, it would be 3 to 2, but when you're weighing it, it would be exactly the same. So now that we are done mixing, I am going to cover it up and I'm going to leave it overnight, and then we will see tomorrow how much it has risen, and we'll be able to make our sourdough bread loaves. All right, so I hope you're ready to see what my starter now looks like. So I fed it and left it overnight, and I hope you can see all of the bubbles. So I'll show you what it looks like by mixing it up. This is how you know that your starter is active. So you can see here, hope it's gonna zoom in properly, but you can basically see the bubbles. I hope this helps you understand that it needs to be bubbly like this for it to be active. So the recipe I will be making today will be including oat flour, einkorn flour, and spelt flour, and a little bit of, so half a teaspoon of Himalayan salt. That is basically all that is in this bread. If you want to jazz it up and add other spices and flavors, go ahead. This is the bread that we eat on the daily here. My baby also has it, and it's a typical sourdough bread. It doesn't have anything other than salt, flour, and water. And this is about 130 ml of filtered water that I warmed up so that it's at least room temperature. So it shouldn't be hot, but it also shouldn't be cold water. All right, so let's get started. So I'm going to add 2 cups of sourdough starter. So this is a half cup measurement. The reason why I made so much starter is because I will be making 2 loaves. If you use sourdough, you can make sourdough muffins, sourdough pancakes, sourdough pizza, all types of experiments. So I just make 2 loaves a week, and this is enough starter for that. So 2 cups of starter. So 4 half cups of starter, and then we're going to add all of our flours. Before I start adding my flours into my KitchenAid mixer, I'm going to put aside some of the starter for next week's loaf. So make sure that you don't fully use all of your starter that you fed. You need to save a little bit for next week's loaf, or whenever you decide to make a loaf. I make it weekly. I take a little bit of starter and I put it in the fridge so that I don't have to feed it every day. If you are willing to feed your starter every day, or at least every other day, then you can keep it outside on your countertop. But it is basically a live yeast and it requires to be fed. So it's not something that you can just leave on the countertop and leave it for days without feeding it. It will die. So for me, because I multitask a lot, I have a child, I don't have the capacity to feed it every single day. So I put it in the fridge, and every week I take it out, I leave it on the countertop for a couple of hours, and then I feed it and it's active again. So I'm gonna put a little bit aside and put it in the fridge. So I'm only taking half a cup out, and I'm gonna take it and put it in this little jar to store in the fridge. So I close it, and in the fridge it goes. Okay, so now we're gonna add all of our flours. So I'm gonna start with 1 cup of oat flour. So what I did to this flour is I actually blended it myself. I took the oats, sprouted, organic, gluten-free oats, and I blended it in my smoothie blender. And that's how I made that flour. These I actually purchased as flour. So this is the einkorn flour. It's 3/4 of a cup of einkorn flour. And this is sprouted organic spelt flour. This is also 3/4 of a cup. And now I'm going to add the Himalayan sea salt. So this is half a teaspoon of Himalayan sea salt. I'm going to mix it a little bit before I add any of the water. If you don't have a KitchenAid mixer, you can mix it by hand. You do not technically need a KitchenAid mixer. I bought a mixer because I make bread every single week and it makes my life easier. This is actually the mini, it's the KitchenAid Artisan Mini. So I'm going to mix it on low, so on number 1, just a little bit to incorporate the starter with the flour before I add in any water. Okay, so now I'm gonna add a little bit of water. You can see that it's already clumping up. So because I have a large amount of starter to flour ratio, it's almost 1-to-1. So it doesn't need that much water. So I let it mix in a little bit before I add in some water. If you have the bigger KitchenAid mixer, you can make 2 loaves at once, but because mine is small, I can only do 1 of my loaves at a time. So I will be adding water slowly. So I add little by little as it mixes. So I'm gonna add a little bit first and then let it mix. And I'm gonna add some as we go. Adding a little bit more water. Okay, so this is the last of my water. I'm gonna add it in and then I'm gonna let it mix for about 2 minutes. It's currently mixing on 2 if you're using a KitchenAid mixer. You basically wanna mix until the dough is sticking to the mixing wand. All right, so we're done. You'll see that all of the dough will be sticking to the mixer. So I'm gonna let it come down. So I'm going to be making my loaf in a silicone baking dish. As you can see, I am not making a fancy artisanal sourdough bread. I am making an everyday sandwich bread or loaf, toast that you can have every day with your family. And so this is the easy way for you to make sourdough bread that is digestible for your family. I am going to take this dough, so this is how it turned out. I'm gonna take this dough and put it into the silicone mold or silicone dish. I'm not adding any oils or anything to the dish, and that's why I choose to make it in a silicone mold, is because it doesn't need anything to prevent it from sticking. I put my dough in my mold, in my baking dish. So that's basically it. I do not shape it. I leave it as is and I let it rise for 6 hours with a towel on it. I am going to start making my second loaf and then I will show you how I let both of them rise. All right, so here are my 2 loaves. I am going to cover them and let them rise for 6 hours. I put one in a glass dish. If you're going to be baking in a glass dish or in a dish that's not silicone, you will want to either put oil on the bottom to rub oil on your dish, or what I do is I actually don't wash the dish. So I bake my bread in there, I take out my bread, we eat it through the week, and I leave the dish as is. So it has all of the crust that has stuck to the, it's not stuck, it's not much crust. I'll show you when I take it out. All right, so I am going to cover it with a towel and I leave it like this for 6 hours. I'll show you what the bread will look like in 6 hours. All right, so the big reveal. Here's what they look like after 6 hours. They did rise a little bit. Now I'm gonna put them in the oven. I'm going to cook them for 45 minutes, bake them, sorry, for 45 minutes on 350. So I'm currently preheating the oven. So I preheat it until it reaches the 350, and then I will put them in there and let them bake for 45 minutes. It looks like the one that's in the silicone mold had actually risen a little bit higher, possibly the other one too, and then has fallen flat a little bit. So hopefully that won't have an impact on how the bread will look like. Normally I catch it earlier than I let it rise between 5 to 6 hours, and I watch to see how much it has risen. But sometimes, you know, things get busy and we leave the house, and then yeah, so this is the situation we're dealing with, but it should be fine. All right, so this is how the bread turned out. I will take it out and show you. So you can't really see it, but I'm sure just by the fact that I can press it, this is the difference between this bread and the original sourdough breads that I used to bake. This one, because I only proof it for a few hours for the bread to rise, the crust doesn't get hard. So it doesn't break your teeth, and it's something that I can give to my baby without worrying about it being too hard for him. This is why I prefer doing it this way rather than the artisanal way. I will cut through it and show you what it looks like. So here it is. It is not as airy as a traditional sourdough bread, the artisanal type that you are continuously stretching and folding in order to make it airy. This, as you saw, was just made in the KitchenAid mixer, was mixed once, and then it was set to rise and baked. This is what I choose to do because, like I said, it's a lot simpler for me. If you, again, do not have the KitchenAid mixer and you want to see the recipe for an artisanal sourdough bread that you can do by hand, let me know in the comment section below. If you have any requests for future videos as to what kind of recipes you want to see, or the type of information-based video that you would like me to cover, please again let me know in the comment section below. For this recipe, I know I used Spelt, Einkorn, and Oat. Feel free to sub in different flours. The ratio of flour to water should remain the same, and it should work out. And before I forget, here is how the glass dish turned out after I took out the bread. So this is just to show you in which state I would leave it for to bake again the following week. So I just leave it like this, and I set it aside, and then when I'm ready to bake another loaf, I just put it straight in here. I don't have to oil it because I oiled the first time that I used the dish, and since then I haven't washed it. I just continue to store it and reuse it. Lastly, when it comes to the starter, you can use any starter that you have at home. So if you've been making injera, you can use your injera starter. If you have starter that you've been using for an all-purpose sourdough bread, you can use that as well. So just any type of starter will work. If you don't have a starter, then you can follow the simple recipe. So what I did when I started out and I didn't have anything I could use, I didn't have a starter I could use, I just put 3 tablespoons of all-purpose flour and 2 tablespoons of water in a little jar, and I mixed it up and I set it aside on my counter. The next day I added another 3 tablespoons of flour and 2 tablespoons of water. Filtered water is ideal, cold filtered water. Mixed it up and again set it on the counter. And then the next day again I added 3 tablespoons of flour and 2 tablespoons of water, and I did this for 5 days. So this is the process that I used because I don't like to waste, and I didn't like the typical starter recipe that said that you discard every day. So this does not require you to discard a single spoon of starter. So you basically just add to it every single day, and then by the 5th day I had my starter. So I used a portion of that starter to feed to bake, and then I fed. So I used a portion of that starter to bake, and then I kept some aside that I fed and I put in my fridge. So that's how you can start up if you do not have a starter. But like I said, if you do have a starter of any kind, you can use that as well. So I hope that was clear. If you have any questions, please let me know in the comment section below. If you found this video helpful, please share with your family and friends. I really just do this to help. I want a community of healthy people. And I know that these little changes in food preparation could make us so much healthier. So, you know, if only we change the way that we make bread, bread can actually be healthy. So if you know anybody that could benefit from this, please share and subscribe to my channel, and have a wonderful day.